If you're a producer, you could spend years practicing making beats and still get nowhere. Even if you work hard, your progress can stay flat. If this sounds like what you're going through right now, you might be wondering what you're doing wrong and how to fix this problem. Well, in today's video, I want to explain why this might be happening and also give you a solution to start making progress with your beats. My name is Navie. I've been making beats for over 15 years. I've helped thousands of producers fix their beat making problems and start making beats worthy of selling and working with artists and so much more. So let's start by talking about the reason why this is happening. If you go online and you search up how to make better beats, the solution that you will see over and over again is the same: just practice. Well, this is exactly what I once tried. There have been times in the past when I would practice making beats for 20, 30, 40 hours week after week, and I'd still get nowhere. And it's all because I didn't understand one key concept, and that is how to practice correctly. Let me explain. Let's say you are trying to learn a new language. Now, what's the best way to make progress? Well, it would be by reading many types of books in this new language, trying to speak to many different people in this new language about many different topics. And by practicing this new language in so many different types of situations, you gain a more full understanding. Now, let's compare this to how many producers practice making beats. Often they use similar types of sounds, similar BPMs, and build similar types of patterns in their beats over and over and over again. This is like trying to learn a new language by reading the same sentence over and over again.
Misu iton kudasai.
Yes, you might get really good at that one sentence, but is this actually helping you progress? I don't think so. And I believe this is why you're not making progress with your beats either. Think of music as its own language, and by practicing the same things over and over again, you're not gaining a full understanding of how to communicate your ideas in this new language, the language of music. So let's talk about what the solution is. I've tried to come up with something to help you with this very problem if you're struggling with it. It's a free cheat sheet or checklist that you can download in the description box below, and you can try using this the next time you make a beat. The way that it works is it's basically like a restriction list. You choose one or multiple restrictions that you must follow as you try to make a beat. The idea here is that it will eventually force you to be in a situation that you're just not used to, and by learning how to overcome this situation, you will slowly start to build that complete foundation. To show you how this works, let me try using this to make a beat myself. Looking at this sheet, I'm going to start with number 2, avoid using your go-to samples and sounds. I am an enjoyer of 70s library and soundtrack samples. I use them all the time to make beats, but let's try to use something completely different for our sample here. I'm going to use this new Kuchka song. She's one of my favorite artists, and I really like this track. So already this is an extremely different sound palette that I'm used to using, and this is probably going to change my decision making for what kinds of sounds I'll eventually use to go along with this sample. So let's start by bringing this into my sampler here, but before we start building this beat, I'm going to give myself yet another restriction. Oftentimes I like starting my beats by using the sample to create my loop as the first step, but instead I will use restriction number 4, start a beat using drums. So I'm going to put a pause on this sample and come up with a drum pattern first. Let's look through some of these AJ Hall drums that I recently bought. Now, instead of just throwing one of these into my beat and looping it, I'm going to push myself even more. I will throw one of these into a slicer and quickly get all of the different drum sounds isolated. And then instead of creating a simple drum pattern like this, I'll do something more unusual. Whenever you start a beat, you have the most amount of freedom at the very beginning since you have no other sounds or patterns to worry about. So I might as well push my idea here. Let's start this pattern off with a kick, and then a hi-hat where a snare would usually go. This is already going off the rails. A couple more kicks, and then we'll put a snare on the 3, followed up by another snare here. Then I'm going to fill up the remainder of this bar. For the next bar, instead of having a kick on the 1, I'll use a hi-hat. Then I'll follow a similar pattern as the first bar, but I'll throw in an open hi-hat near the end of this pattern instead. Now, one thing about this pattern that you'll notice is that I don't use different drum sounds. One of the advantages of using drum loops like this is that the textures are slightly different from one another. So this could help me build a more detailed drum loop, but instead you can see I'm just going to use the same sounds over and over. Again, I'm trying to do my best to forego what I'm naturally comfortable with and coming up with something that's a bit more unusual for myself. So not only will I use the same sounds over and over, I'm going to also leave this pattern completely quantized. This feels very unusual for me and the types of beat I usually make, but that's exactly what the point is here. Now let's start playing with our sample. One thing that you'll notice about this sample is that it has a very simple, consistent pacing. For example, if we use this pattern as our loop, you'll notice that we have a note change on every single beat. I'll play it once again so you can hear. This is going to be a huge help for this beat, and here's why. As you can see with this drum pattern, it has a very irregular rhythm with notes being played at unusual times. In my experience, when you try building something like this with your drums, you may find that your beat will be missing that constant sense of pacing, and it can start to sound like a series of random notes playing at random times. So introducing some sound into your beat that does have that constant, predictable sense of pacing can help, which is exactly what this sample is helping us do. We now have something to bob our heads along to now. So as you can see, this is why I say this restriction list can be valuable. By starting off with my drum pattern for this beat, it has changed how I use this sample in a way that I might not have otherwise done. If I use the sample first, I would be more free to create a loop that might have smaller chops that have a unique timing, but because I already did that with my drums, my approach has to be different with my sample now. And it's all because I forced this restriction on myself. Same thing with sound selection. I rarely ever use churchy sounding organs like this. I really dislike them in most boom bap beats, but I feel like this would be the perfect sound for this layer that I need in the beat right now. And the same thing with my bass. I'm not going to reach for a traditional bass guitar or a boom bap texture, since I'm not sure those sounds will pair well with the sounds in this beat right now. Instead, I think an 808 might be a better fit for this situation. So after adding a few more details into this beat, here is what I've come up with. And because I forced myself to restrict what I was doing in my beat, I feel like this beat sounds very different than what I may have usually built if I was just left alone. And my powers have grown tenfold because of it. So if you want to give this a try, download this free list in the description box below. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye for now.